What's the first one you guys want to use or find? You want to use the what? Pythagorean? Pythagorean identity. Leslie, what is the Pythagorean identity we're going to use? I'll give you a hint. It has secant in it.
1 plus tan squared u equals secant squared u.
So I'm just doing a substitution here. Who sits over there now? Frida, can you turn off the lights, please? Thanks. So then our substitution says this. Negative 3 halves squared equals 1 plus tangent u squared. Yeah, one more. Yeah, good job, you. Class, negative 3 halves squared. Nine fourths, right? It's just negative 3 halves times negative 3 halves. So negative times negative is a positive. 3 squared is 9, and 2 squared is 4. So here I have 1 plus tangent of u squared. Remember, these are the same thing. Well, I need to get tangent by itself, so I'm going to subtract 1. But if you look over here, my common denominator is 4. So in some ways, I'm really subtracting 4 over 4. Do you see that? So this is just going to equal 0. So I'm left with tangent of u squared equals 9 minus 4 is 5 fourths. To get rid of the power 2, I would have to. You're taking the square root or radical of both sides. Now I'm left with tangent of u equals the square root of 5 and the square root of 4, because remember this is the square root of 5 over the square root of 4, and the square root of 4 is 2. And remember, it gave us a hint. Remember, you're taking the square root. This should actually be plus or minus. And the reason why I'm only taking the... Which one? Why? Because it tells us, right? Yeah. Greater than 0 basically means another word for positive. So this would be tangent of u is radical 5 over 2. Okay, so I use the Pythagorean identity. Is there another identity I can use to find any of the other trig functions? Reciprocal identity. Which reciprocal identity am I going to use? Okay, now think of the link. I want to find cosine, so that's why I'm going to use cosine of u. Don't use 1 over cosine. I'm just going to do a substitution. I know that secant of u is equal to negative 3 halves. So right there I'm going to write negative 3 halves. Cosine of u equals 1 over negative 3 halves. So I'm going to write mine sideways. 1 divided by negative 3 halves. Did you notice how I didn't change anything there? Now the division turns into multiplication. What happens to this expression? Therefore, cosine is equal to negative 2/3. Let's put that up here. Alright, what can we find next? Okay. So I want to find cotangent. That's equal to 1 over tangent. Tangent we already found. So I have 1 over radical 5 over 2. I'm going to turn that sideways. 1 divided by radical 5 over 2. That'll turn into multiplication. You take the reciprocal here. I'm going to rationalize. So cotangent u equals 2 radical 5 over 5. How do we find sine now? Okay, you could use a quotient. You have tangent, and it's sine over cosine. We can also use a Pythagorean identity. I'd rather use a Pythagorean identity. What's the Pythagorean identity we're going to use?
Sine squared u plus cosine squared u equals 1.
Yes, that would work, but I would have to use a reciprocal, right? So there is one that has specifically the cosecant.
Oh, 1 plus cotangent squared u equals
So it wasn't wrong to use the other Pythagorean identity, but I would have to use the quotient identity with it. So in some ways, this is kind of like shorter. So we're kind of just thinking of always to be more efficient. So cotangent, I'm going to put it there. So I have 1 plus 2 radical 5 over 5 equals cosecant u squared. Class, how do I make these common denominators? So make it a fraction over 1. Multiply by 5 over 5. So I have 5 over 5 plus 2 radical 5 over 5 equals cosecant u squared. Question?
So when you plug in cotangent, you don't have to square it?
Ah, you are correct. I forgot my square. Good job, you. Uh-oh, that changes ours. So, good job, Royce. 2 squared would be 4. Radical 5 squared is just radical 25, which is 5. And then 5 squared is 25. So we're going to have, really this should have been 25. Do you guys see why? So now I have 25 plus 20, which gives us 45 over 25 equals cosecant u squared. And you can save yourself by just reducing. How would you reduce that? Yeah. 9 over 5, 5 over 5, so really you just have 9/5. So 9/5 equals cosecant u squared. And then just to find cosecant, I'm going to take the square root. Square root of 9 is 3. Square root of 5 And remember, when you take the square root, you have plus or minus. So we'll come back to that. And I'm going to rationalize. So my answer is plus or minus 3 radical 5 over 5 equals cosecant. How do I know if it's going to be positive or negative? Cotangent is positive. So that means wherever we are, we're probably in quadrants 1 and 3. So cosecant is going to be what? Negative. So negative 3 radical 5 over 5. And you can look at it. Tangent and cotangent are positive. Do you see how all the other ones are going to be negative? I already know what the answer is going to be here. Negative. And the last one. To find, I just need to take the reciprocal. So reciprocal identity. I want to find sine, so I'm writing sine first. So now I can do a substitution here. Question?
Do we even really have to, like, do you want us to write it out? Because when I found, like, cotangent, I just felt like it was kind of a waste of time since, oh wait, what was that? Yeah, it was like a waste of time because, like, we already found 10, and then it's like from 10, you can literally just, so do we have to actually physically write down the equation, or can we just?
You should show me the work that you were using the reciprocal of tangent, correct? Which is fine. I do want you guys to note, I want to practice the Pythagorean identity, so it wouldn't be wrong if you used different identities to find them. Yeah, it's not wrong, but I think you will end up recognizing you will need to use the Pythagorean identity at least once. 1 over cosecant. So that's going to become 1 divided by 3 radical 5 over 5. This is going to turn into multiplication, and you're going to take the reciprocal. So now I have 5 over 3 radical 5. Question? Good job. I should have a negative. I'm going to multiply by, or rationalize. So now I have sine of u equals a negative 5 radical 5 over radical 5 times radical 5 is radical 25, which is 5, and 5 times 3 is 15. And then you can just reduce there. Negative radical 5 over 3. Now, I will admit, if you did the picture, do you think it would take that much work? No, because you would just find your x, y's, and r's, and then if you knew your letters. But the goal is not to draw the picture. The goal is actually for us to use our identities. So to review, you should know your identities. The hard part is actually thinking about which identity to start off with. Just think about how are they connected. So the first one they gave us to review, secant. How can I find another trig function? I can either use the reciprocal to find cosine, or I can use the Pythagorean identity to find tangent.